So I'm Tammy, as I was introduced, and a lot of people often ask us how this began. So I'll start with that since it sort of started with my kids. They watched the show Ghost Adventures. I will put my disclaimer in now that I don't believe in ghosts. However, they watched it, and it was an episode where they were at Letchworth Village in New York State, and they thought it was really cool. They saw the abandoned, buildings from the outside, and knowing that my camera is usually always in my car, they said, "You should go check that out, Mom. Check out this cool thing," and they showed it to me. So I took my brother, whom Lynn and I refer to as the muscle, because he's my bodyguard. And we went, and I photographed, and I absolutely fell in love with the architecture, and I became very intrigued with the stories of the patients that were housed there and how things have evolved since then. And I photographed for a few years. When I came back that weekend, and I found places around me like Worcester State, Grafton, Westboro, and it moved on from there. I sought out other places around the state. So I did that for about a year and a half or so, and then I really wanted to do something with it. I wanted to get the story out of those patients, what they went through, how we've evolved, to today. And I've known Lynn since high school, and I know she's a fantabulous writer, so she was the first person I thought of. So I reached out to her and asked her if she would help me do something with this and help get the story out there. And it's pretty much evolved since then. I come at it from I like to say negative, positive. I like to find out all about the bad things that happen to patients and what happened because of those, and Lynn builds off that and finding the positive things and the positive changes that have happened in the mental health industry. And it's evolved into talking about our own personal stories as well. And we've pretty much become advocates for mental illness and stopping the stigma of it and doing something about that.
Yeah, excuse me. When Tammy first approached me about this, I don't know if she did it on purpose or not, but she knows I'm a sucker for story. So that's what she told me, is that these stories of the people and these facilities really needed to be told. I do come from it more psychological point of view. I do have a degree in psychology. I'm also currently in the master's program at Springfield College for art therapy. As you heard Mike mention, I found art a few years ago and ran with it, I guess. It's interesting, when we first started when we first started the project and we first started doing the book talks, it was a lot about, we wanted to tell the story of these people. But it wasn't too long into it that we realized that we're not just telling their stories, but we're telling our stories as well. For me, this hits very personally. My entire life I've been struggling and sometimes overcoming, sometimes losing to major depression. And I had reached a point in my life that I couldn't see any light. I didn't have any hope. And if you notice on my shirt, and anyone who gets a book signed by me, I put "Be the Light." And what that's about is my own journey to try to find help. And it took a while, but I eventually found the right person to help me, which I think is a very important distinction, because there are a lot of great psychologists and psychiatrists and therapists out there, but it's really important to find the one that's right for you. I say she saved my life. And she not only saved my life, but she helped me find a life, to find a passion and a reason to keep going. And I guess through my whole life, I always knew that I'd be doing some kind of counseling, but it was actually Tina, my psychologist, who suggested art therapy. And let me tell you, she's pretty awesome. And I want to tell that story. As Tammy tells me, I won't shut up about it. A lot of people are really hesitant about talking about mental illness, because there's this stigma that says that that somehow makes you weak. Well, let me tell you something. From the point of view of someone who lives every day with mental illness, yeah, it's not for the weak at all. It takes a lot. It takes a lot of patience, and it takes a lot of finding wonderful resources. But I want to tell my story because when something that people tend to fear, people fear what they don't know, I want to put a face on it. This is what depression looks like. I laugh, I have my good days, and I have my days I can't get out of bed. Thankfully, I've learned a lot of coping techniques, and most days I can get out of bed just fine. But I want to put a face to it because there's so many people that we talk to. Every time we do one of these book things, or someone contacts us through our website, or stops us on the street with t-shirts, because they're so afraid to ask for help. So here, I'm not big on statistics, but I will throw this out at you, that 1 in 4 adults, and the statistics are pretty close for children as well, 1 in 4 adults will have a lifetime diagnosable mental illness. Now, these are the people that actually went and asked for help and were diagnosed with something. But the problem is all those people that never got help. I have several people in my life who we've lost to suicide because they were afraid to ask for help, or people that have waited until they were at a crisis point to try and find help, and by then it was so much harder because they had to do all that work from the trauma of putting it off for so long. So we've talked at colleges and high schools, and we try to talk to kids because what was it? I want to say it was the National Institute of Health. 75% of people who have a diagnosable mental illness, they show signs of it before the age of 24. So if we can start, showing kids by example that it's not a sign of weakness, it's actually really common. It's one of the biggest killers in our country. Show them that face. I know, shut up.
Shut up, man. So speaking of, we'll get into a little bit of the history in a minute, but building off of what Lynn said as far as our own stories, I suffer from depression and anxiety. My battle is more with anxiety, but I also have a daughter who suffers from both of those as well. So I have it from both ends, my own and my child. And I think the biggest misconception, I think what it is everybody has a stereotype. Like when you think depression, at least for me, before I was educated, I automatically think of like the suicidal person in the corner that wants to slit their wrist because life just stinks. And that's not it. I mean, I have good days and bad days. Again, my depression is nothing like what Lynn deals with. And it doesn't present itself as often. Mine, again, is more anxiety, and everybody presents differently. An anxious person isn't somebody you think of as having like a panic attack where they can't breathe. That's not how I present at all. You wouldn't even know I was having one if I didn't tell you I was. So the education of it is a huge part, and since we started out one way and we've kind of migrated to this, we are very big advocates of education, especially, well, for everybody, but especially for kids. And we think it's very important to, like Lynn said, let people know that people you don't even realize are suffering from it are suffering from it. And one example is, which is my favorite because it was my own child, we were invited by Oxford High School to come and talk to the psychology students there, one of which was my daughter's class. And I had asked her, can I talk about your depression, your anxiety? And she said, you can talk about the anxiety, but not the depression. Because she doesn't want people to think she's crazy or that suicidal person in the corner, because doesn't hold true for everybody that has depression. So we went. And right before our presentation, she comes up to me and says, don't say a word about anything. being her mother, I didn't listen to her. And I did bring up the anxiety. Meanwhile, Emily's in the back row going like this. Again, I didn't listen. So I did respect the not talking about depression, but somebody else brought it up, and
I didn't name names.
you did not, and she pretended it was her niece, but of course Emily knew it was her, and was still going like this in the back row. But that was our whole point. The second she came to me and said, "Don't say anything," that's exactly our point. Kids don't want to say anything because they don't want their friends to think they're crazy or, suicidal or, I don't want to say freaks, but for lack of a better word, and that's kind of been where we've been going with this, not recently, but probably about halfway through, because it has changed and we've realized the need for education. There is such a lack of education when it comes to these things. But all of this was built off of what the patients in these facilities went through.
Yeah. So in the book, each chapter, I wanted to tell the whole story of these facilities, not just Tammy's favorite, the controversy or whatever, but actually some of the chapters start before the facility was even there. Because, there was one, Dever. Yes, I always pick that up.
Dever.
It was,
in Taunton.
Yeah, it was Miles Standish Camp, which was one of the largest disembarkment points on the East Coast for World War II. What I thought was really interesting is that it also served as a prisoner of war camp, which, I don't know, I guess I never really thought, oh yeah, we had those too. But so they held Italian and German soldiers. Well, as you can imagine, being World War II, the Germans were very well guarded and, armed escorts to and from the mess hall. They were confined to their barracks all day. The Italians, not so much. They, they didn't have to they could wear whatever they want pretty much, and they had free reign of the facility, and they had found a hole in the fence and would go under the hole and go into town. Well, this apparently had become very common, so common that the local bus would stop at the hole in the fence and bring them into town. So after the war was over, we sent all the soldiers back to their respective countries, and a lot of the Italians came back to meet because they had found their wives in the town.
So Taunton has a very high Italian population.
Not Italians. I bet you they have awesome food. Not to stereotype, but So I wanted to tell, like I said, the whole story. Every chapter starts out with the story of, and they're all different. Some of them are, I'll just say they were hard to write because it was something that wasn't great, but perhaps caused a change in the system. There are some stories that are, like this one, like I said, mentioned, start before the facility was there. One of my favorites is the chapter on Munson. And it's the story of Mary. May. Oh,
May.
Yeah, Mary's a real name. Okay. May. Yeah, there are 8 million Marys in the world. Okay. She was a patient, and when she was a little girl, I want to say she was in her 80s when I talked to her, and she said, yep, there was plenty of, hard stuff going on, really, not kind of the place you want to be. But what she remembered the most was that there was one orderly. Every time he was on shift, he came in for his evening shift, he came in, tucked her in, and made sure she had her dolly. And this woman, 60 years later, that's the memory she chose to hold on to.
All right, I'll delve into the negative stuff. So not that it's enjoyable, but it really tells the story of what happened. And another part of this is, for me, it was important for the younger generations who didn't know what the asylums or state hospitals were to know what they were, because they don't exist in that capacity anymore with the things that went on in them. Actually, this one, and I don't know if the picture of the boys already went by, there was a group of boys called the Science Club, and also known as the Breakfast Club. not the 80s movie. And they were laced with radioactive oatmeal to find out how the digestive system worked. And that was without their knowledge, without their parents' knowledge. And that was acceptable back then. So there was a settlement in the late 90s to those families. But those are the types of things went on. And Fernald wasn't the only one that was complicit in that experimentation. And that happened at a lot of state hospitals, different sorts of experimentation with these patients. And some of the bad things that happened, they would rip patients' teeth out so they couldn't bite them. They would sterilize them without their knowledge so they couldn't procreate those types of people because it was seen as a negative impact on society.
There are your boys.
There's my boys. So a lot of those things went on, and it was important that they not be forgotten because they did suffer, and this is the Italian one, they did suffer, and it's important that their stories be told. Because of them and their suffering, things changed. And I believe it was the early 70s, because I think it was the year I was actually born, 1972. Ben Reese, he filed a class action lawsuit against the Commonwealth of Massachusetts after going to his son's facility, which was Belchertown, and seeing the conditions there, how the patients were treated. They wouldn't let the parents past a certain point, so they couldn't see everything. And some of the things there, one of the things I had read in his book was that the 85% of the patients in his son's building, now Belchertown at one point, I don't remember how many buildings, but it was a large campus. It's currently being demolished as we speak, but for one building, 85% of those patients were deaf because the staff would turn up the TV so loudly so they didn't have to hear the patients moaning and crying. Now, I see some of you shaking your heads because that's awful. However, we should also point out that some of these staff members were saddled with 100 patients by themselves. So while
With
some
no
were
training,
completely malicious in their actions, the majority really did care, but there was nothing they could do. They were understaffed, and there were too many patients. The staff-to-patient ratio was ridiculous, and that resulted in maltreatment of these patients, which were often called inmates.
Yeah, we've talked to a lot of people, and it is interesting. Every one of them that was in one of these asylums, 60s, 70s, even some into the 80s. Mm-hmm. You start talking to them, and they always refer to the patients as inmates, because really into sort of the 50s, but more into the 60s, until we started coming out with medications that could help some of these disabilities, mental disabilities. They didn't really have a whole lot of treatment. They had containment. It was a time when you had a special needs kid, you go to the doctor and the doctor says, well, you can't take care of them, just put them away and try again. And it sounds horrible, and it is, but there are also some pretty amazing things that came out. One of my other favorite chapters is Westboro State Hospital. There was a Dr. Solomon Fuller. Dr. Fuller was the first African-American psychiatrist in the country. Pretty awesome all on its own. But he was also chosen as one of 7 foreign fellows to go to Munich and study with Dr. Alzheimer. So he was right there helping to understand that when a person hits a certain age, they don't just automatically go senile. That's not normal. That's because of specific things. So after his fellowship, he came back. He worked at Westboro State Hospital for, I want to say, 36 years.
The majority of his career.
And that was full-time, and then he went part-time and stayed there for quite a bit longer. But he did something that really a lot of psychiatrists certainly weren't doing at the time. Actually, not so much in the medical field, especially not in psychiatry. but he did a lot of autopsies. And he studied the brains of people with certain diagnoses. And he was really a pioneer in our understanding of the brain and that what is called these physical manifestations that are causing these problems, which helps to lead toward treatments and helps to, our reasons for admission.
Yeah, that's...
We always have to pause because everybody's focus goes to the side. Okay, so also with Westboro State Hospital now, a lot of pretty much most of these places had their own cemetery. And when a patient would die, they'd give them a number and put them in a pine box and put them in the field. Well, there's the Westboro State Hospital Cemetery Fund. Project Fund, yep. Yes. There's a group of people that are working to find the names of all the people that were buried in that cemetery. And we had the great fortune to do book signing at Westboro Library. Yeah, different place.
Completely.
Westboro Library. And there were two women in the audience that were actually working on the project, and one of them was single-handedly finding names. She was going through city records. She was going through coroner's records and birth certificates and death certificates. As of the end of July, she had already found 668 names, and she wasn't done. I do mention that, we like to mention this too because a lot of people use Amazon.
Oh, yes.
I don't know if you know, but if you do smile.amazon, you can make donations to a charity every time you buy something. It doesn't cost you anything. Amazon makes the donation.
It comes out of your purchase.
Right.
So if you do smile.amazon and .com and you can look up Westboro Cemetery Project. I'm not sure if it's Westboro Cemetery Project or Westboro State Hospital Cemetery Project. You can click on that, and every time you go to Amazon, if you choose the smile option, which most of the time, if you're an avid shopper like myself, it will...
An Amazon addict like me.
Yeah,
yes.
An addict. That's a good word for it. It will pop up automatically if you've already done it, and it does not cost you anything, and portions of that will go to them and fund their research.
Yeah. But there are also many other charities that you can donate to basically for free. Also, we want to talk about NAMI, which is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. They are obviously national. There are, I want to say, about 13 different branches just in Massachusetts. I bring this up because when we first started doing a lot of these talks, people would come up and tell us their stories and how they've had such a hard time finding help, that they tried and no one would help them, no one would point them in the right direction. This is what they do. They are for free. They give talks from, what do they call that?
Voice, something about voice.
In our own voice?
Yes.
Yeah. They do talks where they'd have people, like us, who live with some type of mental illness, and they can talk to friends and family of people that live with mental illness. Sometimes it's kind of hard to ask your loved one certain questions. But they also do programs with CEOs. They talk to business owners on how to, make the workplace a bit better for those who might live with mental illness. And they also have resources to help people find help, which I think is the key. I met with, most of their board of directors, and I asked them, I said, well, what's the biggest problem that you guys are having? They've got the funding, they've got all these services. They said the biggest problem is nobody knows that they're there. So we wanted to say, here you go.
They're there.
Yeah, it's namimass.org. They're really easy to find. They're amazing, wonderful people. There are a lot of great organizations in the area. Another one, our next book is Abandoned Asylums of Connecticut. That comes out December 5th. And we've allied ourselves with Hartford Hospital with the Center for Living.
Institute.
Oh, Institute for Living. I always do that. Institute for Living, yeah. And they actually, for someone who might want to learn more about mental illness, They offer it's actually an international program. It's mental health first aid. It was started in Australia. Yes. But at Hartford Hospital, they're able to offer it for free because they have a grant. So it is an 8-hour course that you don't have to be a police officer or teacher or anything. Anybody can do it. It's a 8-hour certification course. It's a 3-year certification, yeah. And they feed you twice, breakfast and lunch. But they kind of just give you like ways to recognize when someone might be having an issue with mental health, maybe ways of de-escalating it. And that's another thing I think that's really important today because, I mean, you turn on the news, okay, well, lately it's all been
Trump.
The presidential circus. But you know, you hear about these shootings and you hear about, you know, police officers that shot someone was unarmed or things. But I have to wonder how many of these things could be prevented with just a little bit of understanding. You know, it's a free 8-hour class that they feed you with. If anyone is interested to it, we do have links to it on our website. But also, if you just Google mental health first aid, it brings you directly to the page. You can read more about the organization.
A lot of these facilities are closed. McLean is still open. It is a private psychiatric hospital affiliated with Harvard. That, for those of you who have ever seen the movie Girl Interrupted, she was a patient there. Some other patients that were there were Steven Tyler from Aerosmith, James Taylor, Ray Charles, Charles Dickens was somewhere. I think he was there. But there's a whole list of people that you wouldn't even know were in facilities like this. A lot of them are closed. Belchertown is currently being torn down to facilitate housing. Westboro, I think, is in the process of a partial land sale, not all of it. I'm trying to think of all. You have to forgive us. This book was put together last year, so I'm trying to remember. We try to update ourselves. A lot of these deals fall through as well because people get into them. They'll buy them for like $1 from the town. From the state. And then
From the town. Yeah.
Or, you know, and they get halfway through and they're like, oh, we still have millions of dollars left to go in asbestos abatement or lead paint abatement. And they decide, I'm out, I can't do it. So that's the problem. What's going on now is the cost. One of the ones I can attest to, and this is actually a Connecticut hospital, but it's the perfect example, Norwich got a grant. So Norwich is actually owned by Norwich and Preston. The Preston side got a grant. So they have already removed 48 of their 52 buildings that are on their property. Norwich was just sold and they're starting to work on those. The Preston side is being held right now for Mohegan, the Mohegan tribe. They get first dibs at it. And they asked them to hold it so they have time to put together some sort of redevelopment plan, and then it'll be released. And I'm trying to think of other hospitals. Devon just closed Fernald just closed in 2014. It had 13 patients for years. And if anybody's ever been out there, it's a huge campus. I was surprised when I went into one of the buildings that the electricity was all on, the elevator door was open, the lights in the elevator were on. I decided that was a good time for me to go. That just creeped me out. Dever, I was in Taunton a few weeks ago at my son's soccer tournament, and I was sad to see that it's basically gone, all of it. The only part left is the 911 dispatch centers that are there. So they're starting to redevelop. Some are still sitting. Munson is completely still there. To my knowledge, the last time I went out there, which was probably about 4 or 5 months ago, it was still there, untouched, just boarded up. A lot of problems that we're having, and we saw this with Belchertown, is, of course, the teens. Drinking, paintballing. Paintballing is a big thing in these places. Belchertown just had a few fires. So they're burning the buildings now. You have urban explorers that are breaking into these places. I will say I have never broken into one of these buildings, ever. Shh.
Hey, if the door's open or a window, she'll go in.
If
but
the
no
door
breaking.
is open, I'm in. And I see no trespassing signs. But I've never broken in. But that's a lot of the vandalism, and people are huge on stealing the copper. And for anybody that is watching this, there's no copper left, so don't bother. It's been years in the making, it's gone. But some of them are so deteriorated. When I had gone into Belchertown with my brother, I mean, like the whole ceiling was just hanging. And there was actually one particular building we went in, which may or may not have been in the slideshow. These pictures, by the way, are not in the book. These are things that are not in the book. And we did that on purpose so that you could get another point of view. But one of the buildings we went in, we went up the stairs, we walked to the edge, there was no floor, no ceiling, and the floors were kind of just suspended by one wall. So they're dangerous. They really are dangerous. I'm trying to think of the other hospitals we have in the book.
Well, but they're all pretty much running
They're all
into the
pretty
same
much-
problem.
right.
It's a matter of, the state had taken them by eminent domain, and then when they closed, they sold them back to the cities or towns for $1 or $2. And that's the biggest problem with them, is they're a huge safety hazard, but it's all the cleanup that is hard. She mentioned Belchertown. I think this is the third time Belchertown has been sold. And it's just, they buy it for a couple of dollars with the stipulation that they have to have it all cleaned up before they put anything else up. And they're finally actually bringing buildings
There's a lot
down there
down
now.
now.
But a lot of them too, they're huge. I didn't really realize just how huge. A lot of them, they were, pretty much all of them, their own little cities.
Yeah.
They had, farming was huge on these.
Piggeries,
Actually,
dairies.
we mentioned Westboro State Hospital. They were actually there farming on that land long before the building was even, or any of the buildings were put up. I say what the first records were of the farmer and his wife and the small group of 10 men to work the fields.
Some of them were almshouses before that too. So they started out as something else.
Yeah.
Westboro is still open to a degree. They do have a building on the opposite side of the road before the actual main campus that is in operation.
It's a DYS facility, I think. It's not for mental health.
At first it was, and then they migrated. There's a DYS facility on the main campus that houses, well, it must be, I don't want to say bad, but
It's got razor wire.
it has razor wire, so yeah, they need to be contained, I guess. But so some of it is being redeveloped, but a lot of it is just sitting. And speaking of Belchertown, on one of my, I think, 8 explorations there, or visits, I should say, I ran into a neighbor of the property while I was parking my car inconspicuously around the corner, and I got to talking to him, and he was telling me how I cannot wait for that to go because because everything is open, all the windows are open, doors are open. They weld them shut literally every other week, and somebody undoes it. So he was telling me that he could smell it. He can smell it in the air, and that's all he can smell in his house. And so he was pretty angry about that. So a lot of these people are kind of just fed up, like, we want to be done already. And a lot of this land could be used for so much more than it is. And it's unfortunate, and for me, this is huge. I feel like there was missed opportunities when the buildings were in better shape, that they could have been used for a college campus or some sort of things like that in their beautiful buildings. I was fortunate enough to get a tour of Westboro State Hospital Administration Building, and there's a beautiful mural inside there. It's absolutely gorgeous, and it's from the 50s. I looked at the date on it, and it's gorgeous, and the floors are beautiful. And in this particular building, I mean, obviously it's run down, the lead paint is peeling, but so much more could have happened with that, and it could have been saved. And I don't know if it can be saved. I know, again, this is not Massachusetts, but with Norwich, The only building Preston is saving is the administration building, and they're hoping that whoever develops it retains that building and does something with it.
For the first book was a little bit, for this book it was a little bit different than how I'm handling the others. But yeah, for the first book, sometimes it was chat rooms for people with mental illness.
Blogs that we found.
Yeah, or people kind of heard about us from someone who knows someone. But yeah, historical societies were amazing. And a lot of times they would give us resources that would lead to people that we could talk to.
We actually met with Jack Yates from the Department of Mental Health in Fall River.
Yeah.
We went down there and he gave us a bunch of slides, of course, none pertaining to Massachusetts, but they were wonderful slides that we got from him from places in New York and actually all over the country when he worked in them.
And actually,
So
he was
got
a
us great
the
resource.
The first few people that we interviewed, patients and employees, had asked him to give us their information. So now it's a little bit easier because
Now we
we have
know
a book
where to
out, we're
go.
being out doing all these talks and stuff, and people find us on Facebook or they find our website and say, hey, you know, my mom was
Worked
at that
there.
place or worked there, or yeah. We keep joking that we're gonna have to do a sequel to the Massachusetts book because
Yeah.
since we've done it, like people literally coming out of the, well, not literally, but they're coming out of the woodwork. Like people literally this time, stopped me in a parking lot, like, oh yeah, I was, like, where were you a year ago?
A year ago.
But we do, like, especially on our Facebook page, we update some stories, and sometimes people ask questions that we don't know the answer to. But I like to know things, so we try to find the answers if we don't know. And yeah, I was reading this book. It was talking about, it was like scandals of a certain time period or something. And it had a chapter on Wrentham and Fernald. And I was looking through the, like the acknowledgements, which you don't usually, but I'm looking through and it says, Doe West, that she was spearheaded the investigation into Belchertown.
And wrote the report.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, Fernald.
She wrote the report.
In Wrentham. Yeah, yeah. I'm like, how many Doe Wests can there be in Massachusetts at least, you know? As it turned out, it was, one of the professors from Quinsigamond Community College who was a wealth of information. She, gave me her research and
She
the
gave you the
paper that she
report.
wrote and answered any question that I wanted, gave me some people that I should talk to. Because we...
She's one of the people that shut down the oatmeal experiment, yeah.
Yeah, well, and expose really what it was. And with that one too, it wasn't just those places. The one at Fernald and Wrentham, they were, with the Quaker Outs, they were just the ones that got the publicity. But there were,
It was Wrentham.
I found probably
think
at
was
least
in
half
it.
a dozen others that, until I stopped looking because it was making me cry. But yeah, but you look at the difference between ethics and morals. So ethically and legally, some of these things,
Were legal
like
back
sterilizing people without their permission or knowledge, was legal at the time. And ethical, not so much. Yeah.
Well, I think the biggest thing too that we didn't mention also is that things have changed so much because there is accountability now. There is certifications. You have to maintain your certification. There's forever professional development training. So there's so many different things in that regard. There's laws about, staff to patient ratios. That doesn't mean you're going to not have your occasional bad apple, because you will. But I think that class action suit set off that was the start of the deinstitutionalization into group homes and outpatient, and I think that was like the catalyst for complete change. And there's forever going to be change that needs to be done. It's ever evolving. There's actually a story, and it's not Massachusetts, and there is actually a story from Massachusetts that I really can't say because this is being filmed for TV and there might be kids watching, so I'll skip that one. But if you are interested in that story, what's the name of the book by Ben Reese? No, Crimes Against Humanity by Benjamin Reese. Read that book, you'll learn everything you need to know. But there is a story from a hospital in Connecticut where, and this is exactly about the abuse, and I will say that there are records still in these facilities, no matter who tells you what, there are. And I found a whole box, paper box, of abuse allegations, including pictures, transcripts, everything. The box I own at the moment, because number one, I didn't want somebody else to find it and that information to get out there. Number two, we used it for research. Number three, it will be burned when we're done, because I don't think it should be out there for anybody. But this woman, who was an older woman, she talks about how she was pulled out of her bed by her ankles and dragged down the hall and then beaten in the shower by a staff member. And those are the types of things that went on. And it's amazing to me that that could happen, but it did. And there were much worse things. I'll let you use your imagination, but there were much worse things that went on in some of these places. One of the hospitals, again, not Massachusetts, they opened their doors. See ya. They probably had a deadline, but because there was nothing they could do, and those people actually lived under the bridge that connects the Mohegan Sun side to the Norwich side, under Route 2A. That was the beginning of homelessness,
Yeah, because like in the 60s,
in large quantities
in
anyway.
the 60s, President Kennedy was trying to get the system more to an outpatient kind of thing, and he had a two-pronged plan to close these institutions and to open more like outpatient
Group homes or
group homes and
outpatient.
things like that. The problem is all these people got kicked out. President Kennedy was assassinated before having the chance to kind of fix the other
For it
side.
to come to fruition.
Yeah, because the problem was that it hadn't taken into account maintaining these outpatient facilities. So the few that did open didn't have the funding to stay open, and yeah, a lot of people ended up on the street or in jail because there wasn't other
I
places
could
for them.
speak to Westborough's closing and what went on there. Westborough, had a plan, and Worcester built this brand new facility, which everybody was supposed to move to. Originally, Westborough had thousands of patients, and when I left there 10 years ago, there were like 250 patients. And those were high security patients that really couldn't go anywhere else, and they're now in Worcester. But what they did is they opened up some more halfway houses and staffed those. There's never enough money, and there's never enough support. There's not enough mental health facilities, clinics to support them. So people leave and they're homeless. It's really devastating.
Sad. There's a book called The Baby's Cross, and it's by Gail Perkins. And it was a tuberculosis hospital. When she was there, it's Lakeville State Hospital, and she was in there for TB. And in it, she talks about how some of these kids that went in there that were ambulatory were no longer so because they didn't take them out of those cribs. They left them in there in their own filth, and because they were understaffed. And in it, she talks about how they would wheel them outside for an hour a day to get fresh air and wheel them back in. So you think of all those patients that were in there because they had tuberculosis and then they couldn't walk because they had atrophy of the muscles. It's amazing the things that went on. When these people feel desperate or, they're not getting, a lot of these people didn't get the treatment that they needed because there was no support. And that's a huge thing. And part of my mission my personal mission, is to make sure these people aren't forgotten because, your uncle suffered. And that shouldn't be gone, that shouldn't go unnoticed. I mean, there was something there that should be told. And that was important to me that these stories be told. And one of my things that I also do when I'm photographing is I try to find the cemeteries. And a huge thorn in my side is when I show up to one and you can't even tell it's a cemetery. Drives me insane. Tewksbury State Hospital, I did not photograph that. And for some people asked about certain hospitals. The hospitals that I did not photograph, there was nothing of the old hospital left that I could get to or photograph. It was either renovated or not accessible whatsoever without being arrested. or gone. So we had gone to one of our first book signings out there, and I decided I was going to photograph it because I was right next to it. So, and it's a beautiful building. And then I decided to find the cemetery, which was, I don't know, like a half a mile down the road. If any of you, any state park, you can think of any state park in this state, that's what it looked like. Woods. I'm stepping on things I thought were rocks. They were not. They were the tops of the markers. These markers were about this big around with crosses in the middle with the number, patient number on them. And I was stepping on just the top of them. And that's how overgrown they were. There were some you could see that were closer to the road, but the rest of them you would never ever know they were there. And I will tell you, out of the number I came up with, the last marker I found was 500, yeah, right? 591. And I probably saw maybe 75 to 100 markers. And I mean, I'm talking like they're next to trees or in between trees or under the ground. And this is a state-run cemetery.
I was going to say, whose responsibility is
The
it?
state.
Is that the local, because that's not
It
sold
says
in-
Tewksbury State Hospital.
So even though the state sells the property to the
I'm
locality
not-
for $1, the cemetery isn't part of that deal? The
I'm not sure as far as Tewksbury who owns the state hospital. So
It would be nice to know who's supposed to be caring.
exactly.
The caretaker of the cemetery. I don't really care about the building, but I mean.
Right, and there is a new hospital there that they use, a new modern building right next door to the old one. But of course, me being me, I went home right away and fired off an email to the local newspaper saying, what the heck? Why is it like this? This is unacceptable. These were people. They shouldn't be forgotten, you know, and that's such a huge thing for me. But I will say that they're not all like that. Westboro is working to alleviate that problem. There was an Eagle Scout troop that actually went to Westboro, I think it's Pine Grove Cemetery in Westboro, and they dug up all the markers because they did get overgrown and they were a foot under the dirt. And they exposed them all so you can see them. That was their project, and that's when the cemetery project started to come to fruition as far as finding out who belongs to what number, because some of those records are lost. And there are others. Belchertown has one with their actual names on it. They're not just numbers. Medfield does as well. They have a monument outside theirs. I haven't been to that one because I didn't photograph that hospital. But a lot of them do, and a lot of them are working toward, but you have your few that, like, total disregard. Total disregard. Yeah.
I want to thank you so much for coming to talk with us today. I'd like to end with, I was given a wonderful gift that someone was able to reach in and share her light with me. So I'm sharing my light with every one of you so that you can go out and pass that on. Let me tell you something, the best way to brighten your light is to share. It's been one of the greatest gifts I've ever had. Thank you so much.
We have books.